Welcome everyone to our Solving the Houses Crisis event in partnership with STOREYS. We are thrilled to bring together experts from around the province to discuss the affordable housing crisis. We hope you all take the time to listen, learn, and engage with our panelists today in hopes that we can all begin to see the housing crisis and understand the steps we could all take to help with a solution. The BDR team and myself will be monitoring the chat box, but due to constraints and time, only a few audience questions will be selected at the end of the panel for discussions and to be answered. At this time, I'd like to introduce Penelope Graham as our moderator this afternoon. Penelope is the managing editor of STOREYS, a daily digital real estate news outlet with focus on the Canadian marketplace. She has over a decade of experience covering real estate, mortgage, and personal finance topics. Her commentary on the housing market is frequently featured on both national and local media outlets, including BNN, Bloomberg, CBC, the Toronto Star, National Post, and the Globe and Mail. Hi, Penelope, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Luke. On behalf of STOREYS and myself, we are so thrilled to be here today for what I think will be a very engaging afternoon. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have Tim Hudak, the CEO of the Ontario Real Estate Association, Steve Clarke, the Mayor of Orillia. We have Nathan Westendorp, the Director of Planning and the Chief Planner of the County of Simcoe, Mike Moffatt, the Senior Director of Policy and Innovation at the Smart Prosperity Institute, and Bob Schikendanz, the President of the Ontario Home Builders Association. So thank you so much all for being here with us today. As Luke mentioned, due to time constraints, only a few questions from the Q&A will be answered at the end, but we'll be monitoring and ensuring we follow up with those. But for the panel, we have specific questions for each. We'll be allowing all of you time to answer those specifically. And then if any of the other panelists would like to offer comment or follow up, please feel free to do so. So let's begin at the local level. Steve, like many small to medium-sized markets, housing prices have skyrocketed in Orillia over the course of the pandemic, and they're continuing to reach new highs. What implications does this pose for prospective homeowners and as well for people migrating to the area? Oh, Steve, I think you're on mute.
Yes, well, it was going to happen to somebody, and it was likely to happen to me. I appreciate that, and Penelope, I think you've hit on the crux of the issue: is what are the implications of the situation we find ourselves in, and I'll add a little context, and I'll specifically answer your question. And as was said earlier, I think if you look at any small urban center or large urban center in the province and well beyond, quite frankly, I think you'd be very hard pressed to find a mayor that would not describe housing as either the number one issue or the 1A issue, but I'm going to suggest probably the number one issue. It's a critical lack of inventory, and the impact that has on sales prices and rental prices is direct and is the issue that causes the bulk of the problem. And in our area, I'm sure many others, it's right across the housing continuum. It's emergency shelter, it's transitional housing, it's RGI, or rent geared to income, affordable, attainable, single family dwellings, even executive dwellings we have a critical shortage of right now. And each one of those translates and ripples through the continuum. And yes, as you alluded to, Penelope, the COVID really has exacerbated the issue. But I can tell you, I was involved with meetings with wardens and mayors long before COVID, recognizing the issue. And of course, it's just become that much more acute over the last few years. In 2017, for example, in the first 4 months of that year, January to April, the housing prices in Orillia went up 30% alone. And again, that was a couple of years before COVID. But as we all are aware, COVID has made those things even more acute. And maybe if somebody could put on the second slide, that one right there. Sorry, the previous one. Sorry. You had it right, and that's the one right there. This was something that I think a part of a report that BMO put out and used Orillia as an example. But as you can see in the slide, certainly they said you could pick Wasaga Beach, Midland, Barrie, whatever it happens to be, because the scenario is very similar in all these municipalities. But it talked about how I think in 1 month earlier this year, February or March, the average price was about $900,000 for a home in Orillia, which is a few years ago, that was absolutely unfathomable. We are seen as an area for growth. We're depicted that or designated that by the province, and we're certainly going through that. Certainly the fastest growth rate that we've ever seen. We're growing about 50% faster than the province at large. And we're going through, well, traditionally, this has been an issue that has really affected our most vulnerable, the people who didn't have the wherewithal to get in at any level of the housing. But now it's in addition to our most vulnerable, it's affecting our youth, our millennials, and middle class. I know people that are moving out of the area because of a lack of inventory, a lack of affordability, and we're going through a process right now, quite frankly, because we're designated an area of growth through the municipal comprehensive review and the resulting land needs analysis, and of course, a potential boundary expansion. And the very interesting thing about that is we are exploding. We have this shortage. We need to grow. There will be a need to expand our boundaries, even though we're getting significant blowback on that. And there's also a need to intensify. And we are doing that, but we're also, when we do that with certain types of built form, we get significant blowback. So we're really trying to find that I don't think there's really a sweet spot, but the balance of those two things that make sense. And if I could ask maybe the next slide to be put on. Thank you. This is so. We've got this need, and yet we've exploded in our building permits. Up until about 2016, I don't think we'd really hit over 500 building permits, and then starting in 2016, every year has been a record. There were over 600 and 650, and this past year over 700. So there's been an explosion of construction within the city, and even with that explosion, we still have this acute need. So I am concerned about the four parties in the election that are talking about building 1.5 million homes, which I think is probably an admirable and a necessary target. But I am curious about how we're going to get there, and even if we do get there, whether that'll have the desired effect. But to directly answer your question, and actually, sorry, maybe Penelope, if you could just go to the next slide. Some of the projects we have going on to deal with the issue. And we've got, this is an example of a residential development that's, I could see it from up my window, quite frankly. And maybe even the next one. Thank you. Matchdash Lofts, one of our first downtown condominium building. It's a stepped back feature right in the heart of the downtown. Again, we are trying to find these spots within the city that can handle intensified development. And I'd even let you go a little further, please. Next slide. And this is our new emergency shelter. Nathan and the rest of the folks at the county were wonderful and partnered with the Lighthouse. It's our emergency shelter. And the next slide, I believe, will show the transition. Oops, I guess it was on the previous slide. But that's okay right there. So the emergency shelter, transitional housing, we've recently addressed to some degree. And then we had about 9.5 acres also in the heart of the community that we worked. The county worked wonderfully with us, and that's now about an $80 million, 130 unit affordable housing project, with part of that focus being on seniors housing. And the next slide will show what it's going to look like at the rate it's being erected. It won't be too long. And anyway, so these are examples of some of the infill things that we're doing. And even with these projects, it's still an acute need. So directly answer your question, Penelope, it's really shutting out many local people from the housing market, whether that's rent or whether that's purchasing. And it's funny because I've heard this adage a few times. If people had to buy the house they lived in now, many of them could not afford it, which I think is an interesting perspective. And anybody migrating to the area is certainly going to have very deep pockets. But of course, if they do migrate to the area and they have those deep pockets, it actually adds to the issue because it's helping to drive prices up. Anyway, that's really the local situation that we have going on. We are losing some good people who cannot afford to live here anymore. And the other thing that's part of this scenario, which I'm sure won't shock the rest of the panel, is what we'll call renovictions. People that have had a comfortable place to live, affordable, based on their income, and yet people are buying or cashing in and selling off their asset, and other people are either moving in or renovating and disrupting people's lives by quite frankly softly or harshly having them evicted, and that's been a problem we've been dealt with even in this office. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that response. Well, if there's no follow-up from any of the additional panelists, another one for you, Steve. You've alluded to all of this aggressive need to create new supply. One of the recommendations that's come down is that all new residential development and redevelopment in medium and high density land use designations shall provide 15% of those housing units as affordable. So how will this help those prospective homeowners as well as low income individuals and families?
Well, I believe this may be one of the many tools that we'll need to put in each municipal tool bag. I will say that we actually have a target already within Orillia of 10% of our new housing starts that need to be affordable. It's not project specific. We go by area of the city and making sure that target is met within each area. But this is one of the things that very well could be meaningful, as long as the private sector buys into it, of course. Certainly, if you're increasing the designation in our situation by 50% or from 10 to 15. Then that really should have an impact. And this is one of the things that as a municipal legislator or mayor, that we need to work with our regional, federal, and provincial partners to find out who's going to do what and what we can do that is meaningful. So this will be something that will certainly garner a good discussion in the next few months.
Great, thank you. So let's head now to our regional focus. So Nathan, many municipalities in Simcoe County have a ton of undeveloped land. So how can regional and local officials plan to make use of this land for affordable housing units?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really good question. As a planner, I could talk all day about density, about optimization, about multiple units, and Mayor Clarke had some very poignant words, and I really appreciate his in-depth understanding of planning. It's great to hear from an elected official, and we're blessed with those elected officials here at County Council as well. But I'm going to take a bit of a different tack on answering this question. Before I get into some more detail, it's important to frame things for context, because municipal plans are part of the housing system in Ontario. And when we talk about the housing system, the system is basically that which transforms land from dirt to doorsteps. It involves several steps and many players. It also involves other levels of government beyond municipal government. It involves legislation as well as several elements of the private sector, be it real estate agents, construction, tradespeople, developers, financial sector, and the list goes on. With that said, municipal plans do indeed have a very significant role, and I appreciate the question. While the answers for every municipality in Simcoe County may look and feel a little bit different, we are a jurisdiction almost the size of Prince Edward Island. There are three key things that municipalities can do, and some are doing and they need to focus on the following, and that is understanding what's missing to be attainable. And I prefer the word attainable rather than affordable. Affordable is a component on the housing spectrum. It's a little towards attainable is someone with a job is looking for a house and they just can't find a house that meets their needs that they can afford a mortgage for. They have jobs and they have good paying jobs. And I've lost staff in the past because people could not find a place to live within driving distance of where they were working. And that's unfortunate. You lose a lot of talent and the economy suffers, municipalities and service providers suffer as well as the private sector. So understand what's missing to be attainable. Partnerships is also a clear focus area, and then clarity. So first, let's talk about understanding. Understanding what types of units the community has already. understand what's already approved. So what's in that development pipeline and what's holding that pipeline back from delivering units on the ground? What can people in that community afford? Every community is different. It has a different economic and demographic background. So what does that mean? And then what types of units may be missing or are still needed? Commonly, the missing middle is what's missing. But what is that? On a street level, the missing middle and what it needs to look like might look different as you go from places like Barrie to Collingwood to Victoria Harbour to Brechin to Orillia. Simcoe County is actually moving forward with a study this year that will look at things like this, engaging with those involved in the housing system to extract what ideas and opportunities need to come to life within that system to make housing more attainable. So what can municipalities do? What levers can we do that are meaningful for the development industry to realize the plans that we have for the community? Elected officials work with their community and their electorate to craft a vision. How can we bring that vision to life, and what municipal levers do we have to do? Understanding this information leads to a community knowing some of the elements that it needs to focus on within their future official plans. And yes, it often comes with more increases in density beyond what we've seen in the past, because making better use of the land we have today will ensure that we have more land to enjoy and grow on tomorrow. Next, we have the second focus area, which is partnerships. Building great communities in Ontario is indeed a partnership. Some may not see it that way, but I do. Municipalities go through processes to craft their plans and that they feel reflect the vision for the community to ensure a prosperous and sustainable future. However, it is the private sector, landowners, developers, builders, and tradespeople that actually and typically get the vision built. There's some municipal and federal and provincial investment through things like long-term care and, like Mayor Clarke noted, transitionary housing, affordable housing, and that will still always have a place. But what about the market housing? To bring the vision to life that a community has, all elements of the partnership and the housing system need to understand each other's world a little bit better. And this is after 20 years of working in the industry. I still would love to see what the developer's pro forma looks like, so that when I'm sitting across the table as a planner and I'm saying these are the rules, I understand the impact of our rules and our decisions. Is the plan that a municipality has buildable? If so, great. If not, is the plan more of a dream than a vision that can be achieved? Equally so, is a development proposal reflective of the vision and the stewardship the community expects? Does it broaden the tax shoulders of the community to bear the weight of future municipal costs? Does it complement the community? Understanding each other's worlds and what we need out of the housing system is very critical towards success. And we have to look at the system, pull every thread, and understand that there's multiple factors involved, and municipal plans are part of it, but we need to make sure that our plans are meeting the needs of our community, but also buildable on the private side. Finally, we have clarity. I can't stress this enough, and I could probably talk about this all day, but municipal plans and bylaws and processes need to be clear. And many communities in Simcoe County are taking great efforts towards this and continue to do so and have already done so. Pre-planning and pre-zoning can help towards instilling that clarity. Clarity ensures that the community knows what to expect and where to expect it. It also ensures that the development applicants know what to expect in a process, because in the private sector, time is money. So how can we get out of that process and through municipal plans, the vision that's articulated by the community and then built by the development sector in an efficient way that strikes the healthy tension between profitability for the private sector, because that is their business and they need to put food on the table as well. At the same time, ending up with developments that complement a community and also don't take too much time, but have a stewardship lens on it as well. So hopefully that answers the question a fair bit, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. I see Tim has his hand up as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Penelope. And just off the top, I just want to thank BDAR, both President Luke Woolsey and Chantel and Jillian and Julia Price-Creek stands up. I think BDAR does an awesome job at raising important issues. I think our president-elect Tanya Archinosi from OREA is on the call. as well. So just want to say a quick shout out. Just want to jump on that last comment. You know, one of the things that I think we should do, we've pressed at OREA with the province, is for municipalities doing good work, and we just heard about a lot of the good work that's being done in Simcoe County, reward them. There's nothing like an incentive to reward good behavior and get it done, and then a stick for those who don't follow. I'll give you an example. So I had the honor of serving on the Housing Affordability Task Force, the province of Ontario. One of our recommendations was a building fund that would say if Orillia, if Barrie, Simcoe County were exceeding their standards, they would go to the top of the list of the next infrastructure program. In every budget, the province, the national government will have infrastructure funds for roads, sewer, transit, recreation center, what have you. So if you're doing a good job, you go to the top of the list. But if you're turning your back on new neighbors, you're shutting your door, you're listening to the NIMBYs and telling your young people to get out of town because they can't afford a home, your project goes to the bottom of the list. That kind of building fund would reward good behavior and help get those that aren't to pull up their socks.
Great, thanks, Tim. So Nathan, you know, some municipalities in Simcoe County, they just don't have the infrastructure needed to support a higher density population. How can regional and local officials work together to, you know, develop and implement a model for things like water or the other infrastructure needed for that kind of new development?
Another great question. It's as similar to Orillia. Simcoe County is going through a municipal comprehensive review where we're allocating growth, and we're looking out 30 years and we're determining where we expect communities to grow and jobs to be. And then obviously the infrastructure questions lead out of that. Simcoe County and its municipalities have a long-standing history of collaboration on many issues, from forestry to long-term care to a variety of services that we've all worked together. Strongly continuing that legacy is absolutely critical to address the infrastructure needs that exist today. And it's something we've collectively already started to do. Finding solutions starts with a keen understanding of the resources and challenges that each partner has at the table. In Simcoe County, we have 16 partners in addition to the separated cities of Orillia and Barrie. So while the county itself is not in charge of water and wastewater servicing, Simcoe County recently completed a study that actually did look at the current and planned capacity of the numerous water and wastewater systems throughout the region. And then next, we need to be looking ahead. So to answer the question, we need to clearly outline those opportunities and solutions that exist, because some of the needs are local, but some of the solutions might be nearby, and some of the impacts might be on a watershed level. So we need to get the right people in the room to have honest, open, and collaborative conversations about solutions about what it would take to make those solutions happen as well. What actions? So we're talking strategic level, but then we need to talk about the tactical level. What needs to be done, and who needs to do it? And what are the best solutions? And then we are moving forward on that. We are moving forward with striking sub-regional task forces about municipal servicing to set the table for those solution-based conversations to occur, acknowledging the county's role in facilitating that, and then bringing the right partners and the right ideas and hopefully the right solutions to bear. As we work towards those solutions, can't forget about funding. It will be helpful, and we need to be coordinated in our approach for advocating for infrastructure funding from upper levels of government. And I believe that that advocacy will be effective if we can show a united front and a coordinated front to address the servicing that we have today.
Great, thank you for that. And it looks like Bob has his hand up. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Penelope. And I just wanted to chime in on Nathan's comments in terms of infrastructure. And many times it's overlooked. We talk a lot about zoning and planning and creating density and allocating more land for development. But infrastructure is critical. And I know from my personal involvement in Simcoe County and a number of municipalities, it is constrained. And in order to solve these problems, as Nathan alluded to, it really requires working together, like I say, like never before, because for instance, the Collingwood New Tech water system affects you know, a whole host of municipalities along the line. And because infrastructure isn't something that you can say, well, we need it tomorrow, you can automatically build it. There's a lot of long-range planning that has to take place just to get off the ground. And then, as Nathan mentioned, the funding of it. And some of these infrastructure projects are beyond the borrowing capacity of a small local municipality. And that's challenging. And sometimes from our industry's perspective, who has the corporate ability to cut a check for, you know, $50, $60 million. And so this all grinds to a halt. So we have to work to far ahead plan this infrastructure and make sure it's in place. Otherwise, without being able to flush the toilet, no homes are going to be built.
Great, thanks for that, Bob. And now we're going to expand our focus to the provincial level. So Bob, back to you. You know, how would setting province-wide zoning standards or prohibitions on things like minimum lot sizes, maximum building setbacks, you know, minimum heights, for example, how would those help the systems that are already in place for land use and planning and approval?
So it's a great question. And on the surface, when you read it, you say, well, that would be pretty good if we could standardize everything.
Mm-hmm.
But 444 municipalities in the province, they all have diverging zoning bylaws. In fact, my experience with even smaller municipalities that have many zoning bylaws, they're trying to achieve a comprehensive zoning bylaw. You know, it's a challenge at best to get that done. To have it province-wide, it's a great goal, but I fear could be bogged down in years and years in trying to find what the standard is. Perhaps we should pivot and focus our attention towards having, as Nathan had mentioned, the process we have to go through to streamline the process and regularize the process in terms of what are the steps, what are the expectations, what is the timing, and be able to measure that timing over a period of time, create a data standard, and if there's bottlenecks, we can look back and say, well, this isn't working, and point our fingers and say, perhaps these should be updated or these items should be updated. I'm not suggesting a province-wide zoning standard isn't a good thing as an aspirational goal, but we have to be very careful that we don't start going down a path that might take many, many years to achieve an end and won't solve the problem that we're facing today.
Great, thank you. Now, I know this topic is of keen interest to all of the panelists. We were all chatting about it earlier. You know, the goal of 1.5 million homes has been announced in the most recent provincial budget. It was also a recommendation laid out by the Housing Affordability Task Force. But Bob, you know, given the rising cost of construction materials and, you know, the lack of available labor, how does the province foresee, you know, overcoming any of the logistical challenges to actually delivering that supply?
Well, all I can say off the top is it's a huge problem in logistics and just getting there, considering over the last 10 years, we built in this province approximately 700,000 homes. Now we want to over double it, and the industry is near capacity. So we have to do a better job attracting young people to the trades. We have to look at the immigration system to attract talent to this country that we need. We talked about infrastructure. We talked about zoning and what I call entitlements. All these pieces have to work in harmony. And it is a huge challenge. I'll acknowledge that. Logistics is, you know, blows your mind. But what we have to do is really start talking and collaborating in a meaningful way. Stop tinkering around the edges, get into the meat of the matter, and see how we can resolve these issues. And we can't push it aside and say, well, it's too complicated, we can't do it. We have to start somewhere. And maybe everything we start off with, maybe not all those measures will be successful, But let's start and let's work together to at least knock some of the dominoes down and work towards solving the issue, because we are in a housing crisis with no easy answers. There's no magic bullets.
Mm-hmm. And I can see both Nathan and Tim are eager to weigh in on this topic. Nathan, why don't you start?
Thanks, Penelope. I just going back to Bob's answer on the last part, and I would agree that as a planner, standardizing the zoning, or at least providing a little bit more of a consistent framework, will not only help the development industry, but it would help community members know the difference between different zones. So yes, that's a laudable goal to work together and towards over the course of time. One thing that I've seen in my career is I think that there's an element of standardization that can happen on the engineering side. Having seen multiple projects go through, our friends in the engineering profession, they do great work, but there's a lot of detail there. And when you have developments go forward, there can be a lot of back and forth and time spent making sure the engineering is right. And I think that there's some wins there in terms of standardization and working with that profession to identify efficiencies as they're involved in the development process just as much as the planning profession is. So I just wanted to respond to that piece as well, because I think that there's some fruit there that we can start to look into.
Great, thanks for that. Tim, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, thanks, Penelope. I was sort of back on the last one too, and maybe I'll come back to this one if you want to have me back in. But let me be the devil's advocate on the province-wide minimum standards, and here's why it's important. We did find, watching from OREA's point of view or the Housing Affordability Task Force, that some municipalities, not saying it's Simcoe or Barrie, Orillia, but some other municipalities sometimes create artificial barriers to satisfy NIMBY forces that don't want new homes, that don't want to have new homes people can actually afford. And by way of example, we found one, I believe it was in Toronto, where there was a 7-story building that was proposed, and for like 1 hour or something like that of the day, there's a 6.5% shadow in a new park. Just like for 1 hour, 6.5%. And that entire project got shut down, lost all those units, including a couple dozen affordable units that were part of that building. And that's outrageous. So when you see municipalities that sometimes will throw up outdated or artificial obstacles simply to stop housing, there needs to be some kind of referee to step in on that matter. Two other examples of this, like, do we still really need, particularly in urban areas, minimum parking standards? Maybe they made sense in the 1970s and more people were getting cars, but in urban areas, it's actually going the other direction. They can add up to $165,000 per unit for minimum parking. Another one like this is the ability to have a secondary unit in your home. This is a great way to actually pay down your mortgage faster, 20% plus. It also democratizes rentals, so people can have a choice of rentals in any unit of the province. Fortunately, some municipalities have laws that outlaw that in specific neighborhoods. I call that snob zone. I'd love to see more rental units available that people can actually afford. Last quick point, Penelope, a lot of this is a great event, did a great job as chair. Kathy Pullen, another one of our OREA board members, is here. So we've got all the bigwigs in the audience. So I'm going to be on my best behavior.
Great, thanks for that, Tim. I can see that Mike is looking to weigh in.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we're doing a great job here of identifying all of these bottlenecks. As Tim points out, there's all kinds of regulatory ones. On the labor side, I think the federal government needs to be doing more. If we look at the last draw of the federal skilled trades program, I think we, through express entry, I think we only had a couple hundred people move in, which which is unacceptable given the trade shortage. The way we've structured the immigration program, well, I'll give you an example. I'm a university professor. My dad's a sheet metal worker who did HVAC. The immigration system is weighted to bring in more people like me and fewer people like my dad. And I'm going to suggest that it probably, given the shortages, and maybe I just don't want competition at the university level, but I think we need to weight things the other way for a little bit while and bring in more blue collar labor, because that's the kind of thing we need. I think we've gone too far over the last 20 to 30 years to put our thumb on the scale on the immigration system towards white collar labor. So I think there's more the federal government could be doing there.
Great, thanks for that input, Mike. So Tim, sending it back to you. It's been recommended that the Deputy Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing lead an all-of-government committee. So that's going to include the key provincial ministries and the agencies to meet weekly to ensure that all of the recommendations from the Housing Affordability Task Force be implemented. So how important is it that the provincial government ensures the recommendations made in that report are put in place and that they continue to receive sustained attention and that those results be monitored?
Yeah, critical. I mean, it is pretty rare for someone like me who spent 21 years in provincial politics to say the solution we need is another committee. That's the first time I've ever said that. Mm-hmm. But it is true here because you need a keeper of the flame. So Penelope, let me loop this back. Last question. 1.5 million homes is an aggressive target, but at least we're setting a target now. And that's been embraced not only by the PC government, but the Liberal Party, the Democrats as well, and I think the Green. So it's the first time I've ever seen that alignment. That is a good thing because if you don't actually have a target, you're simply practicing. This committee, Penelope, to answer your question, will help keep the flame to make sure that the recommendations in our report, or at least a good percentage of them, are carried through. Because the recommendations are so broad across government, including municipalities, if you don't have somebody centrally, keeping that Bible, it will disappear in the thickness of government. The 1.5 million is important too. I think Mike Moffatt was one who championed this when he came to our committee, did a great job. That is going to help us with population growth when millennials come to the marketplace, new Canadians, but it's also making up for the underbuilding we did in the 2000s. So we actually want to make an impact on affordability. You got to hit that number. Otherwise, prices will keep slipping out of reach of incomes.
Mm-hmm. And another point brought forth by the task force report was limiting public involvement in housing developments. So can you tell us a little bit more about how you foresee this helping the housing approval process and eventually lead to more developments actually being approved overall?
That one's for me, Penelope?
Sorry, that's for Tim. Yes.
Yep. Okay. We did hear a lot about abuse of the consultation process. Should there be consultations on housing developments? Should neighbors have a say what's happening in their backyard? Of course they should. But it's gone to such an extent now that in some cities, again, Toronto was the one that was circled in our hearings. I didn't hear about this in Simcoe County. But councillors could take something that was the final stage of approval and demand another committee meeting. And what I said earlier about committees, it was death by committee. They would have more and more studies, more public consultations, more add-ons. The builder would get on this merry-go-round and have to visit department after department over and over again. Before you knew it, because of those delays, the prices, the costs had gone through the roof. So either the homes couldn't be built or they would be so expensive that average middle-class families could not afford them. So we want to make sure that not frivolous claims are going forward, that you follow what's in the Planning Act and the number of hearings, but to end this endless merry-go-round that drives up housing prices because of the delays. And that means that average families can't find a place they can afford.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks for that. Let's broaden this out to a national focus. And Mike, we're going to send it back to you. It's been said that Canada has one of the lowest housing supplies out of all of the G7 countries. How is building more homes in cities where people actually work, how is that going to help the Canadian economy, the workforce, and overall affordability?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. I think there's three big things that we need to think about. Mm-hmm. The first is workforce mobility. That's a topic that governments think about a lot. And we usually think about that in terms of, credentials recognition. So if I'm a doctor from Manitoba, could I work in Ontario? But one of the big barriers to labor market mobility is housing prices. So, if I'm living in rural New Brunswick and, Alliston Honda is, has some great job that I'd be qualified for, I'm not going to be able to take that, right? Just because any, increase in salary and productivity I get from that is going to be swamped by increased housing costs. So we see this sort of lack of mobility due to housing. Second one is attracting international talent. We've got great tech firms all across Ontario who are trying to bring in talent from all over the world. But again, if I'm Barrie, if I'm Kitchener or London, and I'm trying to bring in a tech entrepreneur, and a company from Pittsburgh or Columbus or Rochester, New York is also wanting to attract that person, they're going to be able to say, well, look, you can buy a home on 2 years worth of salary here. If you go to Barrie, it's going to cost you 8 or 10 or 12x. It puts us behind. So it makes it very difficult to attract that next generation of entrepreneurs and talent that we really want to have in this province. And the third is increased commuting. I'm going to use an example from a different part of the province, but let's say you're a respiratory therapist, you're working at Grand River Hospital in Kitchener, you're a young person, you can't afford to live in Kitchener. And if you're buying a home, you're probably buying a home in Woodstock or Tilsonburg or someone further away. And you're driving to work every single day at $2 a liter. That's time you're not spending either working or with your family, but that also causes the province to have to build a lot of extra infrastructure. If we allow people to live closer to where they work, our infrastructure costs go down. Families aren't having to spend $2 a liter on gasoline all the time if they could, walk to work, take transit to work. So there's all of these structural and frictional costs that happen when we simply don't have enough homes in the locations in which people want to live.
Great, thanks for that. So it looks like we have some time to take some questions from the general Q&A. So why don't we start with this one from Natalie H, posed to all of the panelists. What is the top recommendation you would give to municipalities to change the conversation, so focused on the NIMBY voices, to be one that is more around inclusion? Anyone keen to weigh in on that one?
I can jump in, Penelope.
Yeah, great.
That's really hard, right? Because having spent 21 years in politics, I get this. Municipal councillors will be, and they've been elected to look out for those that send them to office. And often you can overlook those that haven't moved in yet. So if NIMBY forces arise, election coming up, housing projects often get lost, and that's a shame. So how do you fix that? What's the one big change? I think if the province were to set goals for municipalities on what they should reach on housing, again, that average families can afford, but then reward them. And those that don't hit their targets, there's some kind of sanctions. I think that carrot and stick approach, let them figure out how to hit those targets. I think that would make the biggest long-term difference.
Great. And I can see that Nathan is looking to weigh in as well.
Yeah, thanks. Just to build on what Tim was saying, for one, and then I have one other comment. Yeah, I do think that those targets should be municipally driven. So every target will be different for a municipality, but they have to be progressively and introduce some change so that every municipality is doing its part in achieving that overall goal from a province. So with that said, in terms of the question, how do you change the conversation around NIMBYism? You have to look at the money. More units on less land means more taxes that front onto less pipe. And in the future, when you model that out, it means the tax burden for future generations, or even myself in 10 years, is going to be less. And I don't hopefully have to deal with massive tax increases. So you have to look at the money and what one form of housing that's proposed versus another form of housing that might be proposed, what that means on the tax line 10, 15, 20 years down the road, and help change the conversation about the benefit to the municipality and to the future, and to the future residents, that new growth, and yes, that gentle density increase, what that will bring to the community. And then perhaps some, when they see that information, they will be a little more inclusive of that new development rather than have a NIMBY approach.
Mm-hmm. And Steve, why don't you let us know your thoughts? Oh, I think you're on mute again.
That's what I get for taking a few minutes break. I don't have a lot new to add to the conversation. There's some good ideas. I like Nathan's concept of, well, I'm sure it's everybody's, is setting the goals and the targets. that are meaningful for each municipality, but then actually doing something about them. And I think that's going to take a mindset change in many municipal politicians. And because I think they actually have to have the fortitude to stick to those, to the strategy that is a result of those goals and targets. But I also like Tim's suggestion of incenting or incentivizing some of that, some of those aspects that will help bring about that change in the mindset of the councillor. Because once you see the goals and once you see the strategy, it really is up to council to approve, to make those changes, either in the legislation or in the actual decision on the development. And so that with that mindset change, and maybe with some rewarding that mindset, that more councillors will have the fortitude. But that's that mindset, I think, that has to change.
Great, thank you. Let's take a look at this one from Ashley P. She says, we often hear the term municipal red tape as a reason for the affordability, attainability, supply crisis we are currently facing on all levels. Many people, including even some of the most experienced realtors, don't understand what that actually means. And on that note, how much is this municipal red tape a result of NIMBYism when people, developers and builders, are trying to make a change, often for the better? Bob, why don't you go ahead?
Excellent question. I mean, we talk about red tape delays. The old adage, time is money, and when projects do get delayed, they add enormous costs. Ultimately, that's borne by the consumer, the purchaser of the home. And certainly NIMBYism or pushback from local residents is a factor in that, but it's not the only factor. There's many approving authorities that are involved in the final approval process, anything from the local municipality. In the case of Simcoe County, there might be Simcoe County, the school boards, provincial ministries, Ministry of Natural Resources, Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. Then we also have the Conservation Authority. I mean, the list goes on. And these are all, it's almost like a spider web of commenting agencies that report back. And they all go on different timelines, and there's no accountability in terms of the timeline. So ultimately, this is what red tape is, that there's no structure, there's no framework, that if something lands on your desk and you have to comment on it, there's a timeline where you have to reply. And sometimes these processes aren't working in parallel. And all we can say from an industry perspective, if the average time for a project is 10 to 15 years from application to moving people in, there's always a reason, but there's something fundamentally flawed with the system. And getting back to both Tim and Nathan's comments, is we have to work on creating a process that's more regularized, that we have an understanding from an industry perspective what is expected when we come in and make applications, and in turn how that works through the system and when we can expect responses back.
Great, thank you. Looks like Tim has something to say.
Yeah, just add to that. Ashley, thanks for the question. Thanks for your leadership among realtors, particularly on the commercial side. Yeah, Bob really nailed it there, I thought, quite well, Penelope, on the timelines and the conflicts between agencies, the province, municipalities to drag things out. Some of the specifics that we've talked about, I mentioned earlier on minimum parking standards. Does that really make sense in 2022, especially in urban areas, or the restriction on secondary suites? There's often things around heritage designations, angular planes, shadows I talked about, what finish the house has to be, where exactly the door goes, minimum lots. There's a lot of things here that cause entanglements. One I'll highlight actually a commercial. So one we heard about was I think it was a jewelry store, it was a retail store anyway in Hamilton, that wanted to switch over to a martial arts studio and hire more people. A commercial place, the retail is closing down because of COVID impacts. And there's all these different categories of commercial, and they got turned down because it wasn't the kind of commercial property, and the jobs went elsewhere. A good example of provincial red tape is around wood frame buildings. These are environmentally friendly. We have a lot of strength in wood frame. We're good at it, and Ontario is going to create a lot of jobs. But there's provincial limits on how high we can go. We recommend now going up to 12 stories like other provinces and states are doing.
Okay, thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Nathan, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, thanks, Penelope. And just to build on something that Bob had said, when we talk about regularizing the process, that's true. We also have to regularize the expectations on submissions. Sitting on the receiving side of applications, over the course of time, you see a wide variety of quality of submissions. And that can have a very strong correlation to the time and the effort and the complexity that the review agencies have to wade through, and then you get responses back and forth. And ultimately, when you look at the system, we have a system that's designed for review. So case in point, it's very much review based, which is okay because you need those checks and balances. You have a proposal and municipal staff need to make sure, or agency staff need to make sure that other principles are being adhered to. That's okay. But let's take an example. Municipalities do an official plan and a zoning bylaw to identify where people can build and where they probably shouldn't build. But then most documents are designed so that when you apply for something, then you also have to submit environmental reports and all these other things. And that clarity on where you can build and where you can't isn't always there. Hence, more studies, more review, more time, more money. If municipalities could have more resources to be able to outline those, or work with the development community at the planning stage to clearly articulate where building can and can't go, I'd really love to explore how we can fast track that review so that we've already done that. Case in point, environmental review. We know where those buffer areas are. It doesn't require 6 months of review. And because the right people, public and private sector, have already checked it out before the application came through. So that is one area that needs to be explored, and do more of that pre-planning rather than the review-based and the study-based approach that we have right now.
Great, thank you. Some very interesting points. Now we have a question here specifically for Mike. This is from an anonymous attendee. So to Mike, if everyone wants to live close to where they work, can you comment on the provincial election and the focus on building more highways to get to work?
I get in trouble when I comment on provincial elections, so I'm not sure I want to go on this, but I would say that we need to understand that the demand for highways comes from the fact that we're not building enough in our cities. So we did a report for the city of London. We worked with the London Development Institute, and saw that what was happening in London was it's hard to build up because of municipal rules, and it's hard to build out because of urban growth boundaries. So what's happening is the new housing growth is getting built out into the county, which basically accomplishes nothing. You're actually making that sprawl problem that you're trying to avoid even worse. And it's going to harm London's municipal finances because those residents are paying their municipal taxes to Luke and Biddulph and then driving into London and using London infrastructure. So I think we need to understand where that demand for the highways is coming in the first place. And it's often coming from the fact that the way we've set up our system, that we're pushing development out into rural area, out to, Thorold in Niagara County, that in Niagara region, as an example, if you're going to push out development there, people are going to naturally ask for highways. So if you want to stop or slow highway growth, you've got to be building more in your cities.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for one last Q&A. This is from Chris S. What does the panel think of the concept of the 15-minute community? That design concept would allow municipalities to spend less on infrastructure and could encourage a quicker development process. I can see everyone's giving that one a bit of a think.
Yeah, I'm for it, and I think a lot of it goes back to the things that Tim mentioned. Is that there's a lot of the things that you would want to do in a 15-minute community you can't because they're currently illegal, like having 12-story timber by right. Some buildings where you have to have 2 staircases, which makes the structure unaffordable. So if we want to have those 15-minute community, and I live in one in Ottawa, but the one I live in Ottawa was built during World War I, and a lot of the structures you built back then you can't build today. So I think we need to be looking at all of those rules that have been mentioned on this discussion and say, are those preventing the kind of neighborhoods that we'd like, the kind of walkable places that we were able to build 100 years ago with 100-year-old technology, but we can't seem to do today.
Mm-hmm. And Nathan, why don't you finish off the convo?
Overall, I'm supportive of the 15-minute as a planner. 15-minute city is good. The concepts that are embedded within it are admirable, and we should strive to pursue them. The difficult part is we've got municipalities that are under evolution today. So how do you integrate that concept into a community that's already underway? And it requires a rethink on how we move and the interface between land uses and a significant investment in parks, because that higher density, you can't just build higher density. People, if they don't have backyards or their own amenity space, they need more shared amenity space. So we need to focus on that, and transit, how to move people out of their cars, but still move them between communities, because that will always occur.
Great, thank you. Well, I think we've come to the end of our time. I want to thank each panelist for joining us today. As we all know, housing affordability is a very complex and ever-evolving topic. I think we're all coming away from this with some fantastic knowledge. And again, on behalf of STOREYS, thank you so much for inviting us to participate. And yeah, thank you for a fantastic conversation all.
Thanks for coordinating, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Have a great rest of the day.